As a team that most looked at as an underdog last year, the Mississippi State Bulldogs have a lot to look forward to this season. With a better recruiting class than they've had in years, promising transfers, and their all-star return in Tolu Smith Jr., what could go wrong? Well, maybe more than the Bulldog fans bargained for this morning when they got the announcement that Smith will be out with an injury for a large part of the season. Stick around and see how we think this will affect the Bulldogs in this episode of the Hoops Southbound podcast.
The Tennessee Volunteers are going to the Sweet 16.
Florida takes its place in history. Back to back and unforgettable.
Three-pointer on the way, no good. Falls with the dunk at the buzzer. It goes and Arkansas wins.
And the Kentucky coronation is complete.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Hoops Southbound podcast. As always, we are in the Home Field Apparel Studios where they know college. They help you show you're part of your team's community while standing out from the crowd. Check them out today and use promo code Variety Sports. Lots of cool threads for your team there. David, you got your Variety Sports gear?
I do have a Home Field Apparel shirt, actually. I've got the 1994 Razorback Retro t-shirt that I got. Love that one. I was actually planning on wearing it the other night to the red and white game. But turns out could not find it. So I went with another shirt yesterday. So it is what it is. We just rotate shirts when you get your team's apparel.
Well, I guess go use your Variety Sports coupon code and buy a new one since you lost that one.
More stuff.
Girl math, it's there.
Yeah, right there.
Well, David, so we got a pretty big announcement this morning from the Mississippi State basketball staff saying that Tolu Smith Jr. will be out for at least the beginning of the season, possibly into SEC play. What were your thoughts when that came across the Twitterverse?
Yeah, I mean, when it came out, like on X, Twitter, whatever the heck we're calling it nowadays, I was just baffled because, like, clearly this is a huge, this is a big deal. This is a big deal. Tolu Smith coming back was just a huge piece of Mississippi State's season, their goals, their plans for what they were going to do this year. I mean, like, that was the thing that so many Mississippi State fans felt really good about, was having Tolu Smith back for another season there, and he's not going to the NBA. He's coming back to Mississippi State. Now, we're not possibly going to see him until SEC play. Yeah, that changes a lot of things in the thinking now for how we really assess this Mississippi State team. So I guess throw the script in the trash for the one that I wrote out before this, because we were going to record this episode on Monday, but now here we are. It's Thursday recording this episode. A lot of the notes, a lot of the things that we put together, the world's changed in just one announcement. You know, it's crazy.
Yeah, that was my first thought when it came out, was thinking back to all the shows that we've done, all the excitement we've had for this Mississippi State team. And there was always a direct correlation to Tolu Smith Jr. that now could be a little bit different.
Yeah.
We mentioned also kind of in the warm up for everybody that, they've had some great transfers and had a great recruiting class. So hopefully that's going to help them out here a little bit. But, this late in the game, I guarantee you they've definitely built a lot of the offense and defense around Tolu Smith Jr. That's going to need some readjusting before basketball starts down in Starksville.
Yeah, it's going to be crazy going through some of these answers to, like, some reports conversation today. I know we're about to jump into buyer BS, and, like, already I know, like, reading a couple of the buyer BSs earlier, my answers have completely changed. So yeah, let's roll into those. We'll try to explain it as we go today, because clearly this is a totally different place than when we were a few hours ago.
Definitely. Let's roll into this buyer BS. We'll go back to back for them. So first one I got for you, Mississippi State has the best front court in the SEC.
If they had Tolu Smith. Yeah. Earlier this season, I had Mississippi State or not this season, but in the offseason when we did our top fives, I had Mississippi State's front court as the best front court in the SEC, and numbers back that up. And Tolu Smith was a big reason of that. Now you don't have Tolu Smith. So the depth is already being tested for Mississippi State. So I'm going to call BS for right now. It's where I was a few weeks ago is not where I am right now. And so like, I got to see how this team adjusts. I got to see how they figure it out. So I'm BSing it for right now. And I'm saying that their front court is still really good, but clearly they're missing their most important piece.
Yeah, definitely losing that piece. I feel knocks them down a couple steps. I think in that episode I said you used your lawyer skills and convinced me that they could be the best front court. So you used them again and talked me out of it. One.
The facts have changed. The facts can change. What can I say? All right, so let's talk about somebody who is going to be on this Mississippi State roster. Shaquille Moore will be Mississippi State's best guard this season. Maddie.
I think I'm going to buy that one. Shaquille Moore, leading scorer returning, or leading guard scorer returning to the Mississippi State Bulldogs. I think add on a year of experience, some time to play with this team. Obviously, the way that this team plays together is going to change a little bit, but as long as you have a good front man kind of leading the way, and I think Shaquille Moore is going to be able to get that done for Mississippi State this season.
Yeah, I think Shaquille Moore should be pretty good. He should be pretty solid. Averaged just under 10 points a game for the Bulldogs last year, and a team that didn't put up a ton of points. But he should be a crucial piece of this backcourt coming in to this season for the Dogs.
All right, David, last one I got for you. Mississippi State will be a 6 seed or better in the NCAA tournament this year.
Depends on what happens with Tolu Smith being out. Like, I got a feeling that's going to be a lot of our answers today. And so right now I'm going to BS it. I'm going to say that they'll still make the NCAA tournament this year. But 6 seed right now does not seem like the place we're looking for. Probably, if depending on how they do, let's say they have a rough stretch. I mean, they could probably be somewhere in like a 10 or 9 seed coming into the tournament right now. But we'll talk through this and see where we're at with everything. But right now, without Tolu Smith, it definitely feels a little rockier than where you were.
Yeah, for sure. It's like you said, we're gonna have that question a lot throughout the rest of this episode, just because he was such a centerpiece for this team. And speaking of Tolu Smith and how this roster and the lineup is going to change, let's jump into it and see what Chris Johns has going on this season. Let's talk about our players to watch. Again, I remind you, our views isn't who we think is going to be the best player on the team, but rather who we think is going to be an interesting player to keep an eye on. David, who you picking?
Yeah, so when I wrote this up, it was actually for a different reason, but I'm going to stay with this player. I'm continuing my trend of picking newcomers on teams, it seems like, and I'm looking at Mississippi State's new freshman, Guy Chol. Look, I don't think this kid is just going to be an explosive impression in his first season there at Starkville, but rather I'm highlighting him because it could be a great year of development for him, and he can display a ton of those future skills he's going to have for Jans and his team in Starkville. In Portugal, he on the foreign tour, we saw a lot of that potential, and he's working with Jimmy Bell, and he was working with Tolu Smith during the offseason and continuing to get better. So originally I was thinking like, man, if we see this kid for like 3 minutes a night, I mean, that's definitely a good sign for where he's at. But now we're going to see him hopefully take on a bigger role on this Mississippi State team as a big man. He's a 7-footer, 3-star. So I didn't expect him to make an instant impact, but early on in this season, he may be a big part of what Mississippi State's game plan is. And if he can carry the task or rise to the occasion, he could definitely be someone to look forward to, not only this season, but long-term in the hump. So my player to watch, Guy Chol, definitely interesting right now, especially with the Tolu Smith injury.
Yeah, definitely. I think, it'll be interesting to see if Tolu Smith, a lot of times we see more senior guys, if they're having to sit out for some kind of reason, for an injury, for something else, taking that leadership role and being a good advisor and mentor to these younger players. I think that could be great for Guy Chol moving forward, especially in the earlier parts of the season when we may not see Smith out on the floor.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Maddie, who do you have?
All right, so if any of our viewers listened last season, they might be able to guess my player from Mississippi State. DJ Jeffries made a fantastic impact at the 4 spot last season, and I think with Tolu Smith out, I see him stepping up his game. Last season, Jeffries really stepped it up at the end of the year, averaging over 9 rebounds a game in the last 5 games. He had several games where he'd go on a hot streak and dominate the boards start racking up points. So I think if we see more consistency like we saw at the end of the year last year throughout the season, I think he's definitely going to be a force to be reckoned with.
Makes sense to me. I think DJ Jeffries is one of the most significant pieces for Mississippi State, and him coming back is a big deal for the Bulldogs. So I look forward to seeing what he's able to do this season there at the number 4, number 3 spot, depending on how Mississippi State puts him in the rotation this season.
Definitely. It's going to be interesting. We said with Tolu out, is he going to be our front man on the 4 spot? Are they going to try and move him to 3, move up some of those transfers or freshmen? I guess we'll see.
I'm empathizing with our viewers right now because this is going to be a more bumpy conversation we have because we've had literally breaking news. So, I feel like they're going to hear us talk about with Tolu Smith being out, quite a bit in this conversation today. But I empathize with our viewers, but I promise we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff today, not just the injury.
Definitely. But David, I know you were big on Mississippi State's front court at the beginning of the year. You had as your number 1 this offseason when we did our rankings. Tell me what made you so high on State's front court, barring the situation we just talked about.
Yeah. So, obviously the most significant news this offseason for Mississippi State's front court was the return of Tolu Smith. Smith was entering the NBA draft in early April while maintaining his college eligibility. And then when he didn't get an actual invite to the combine, he came back to Starkville. He averaged 15.7 points a game, 8.5 rebounds per game. He was one of the best big men in the SEC, leading the league with a 57.8% field goal percentage. He was first team all SEC. So obviously you can tell that this makes a big change into what's going to happen for State this season. But I will come back and I will say this, and this is why I still think State's front court's pretty good. The problem last year with State was that Smith was the only real consistent threat. DJ Jeffries was there. He was very helpful, but Smith was the consistent threat. Now Jans has added West Virginia center Jimmy Bell to the front court depth. He's 6'10 forward from Saginaw, Michigan, started all 34 games for West Virginia. State's also adding, as I mentioned, Guy Chol into the front court, 7-footer. He has a ton of potential. And then Jans is also, like I mentioned earlier, pointed out the fact that he's been working with Jimmy Bell. He's been working with Tolu Smith to get better. So he's in a great spot to develop his career. But in addition to what State has, Keyshawn Murphy will also be back for the Bulldogs for some front court depth. He's going to be he's not a great 3-point shooter, but he can shoot it a little bit, shoots roughly around 30% from 3, helps with the floor spacing. Another good returner, like we mentioned, DJ Jeffries, averaged 9 points a game for the Bulldogs last year, just under 6 rebounds a game. That's a solid front court, honestly, when I'm just talking about those pieces right there. So you're just hoping that you could put a piece of duct tape over the situation that you have and that this front court's still going to be pretty darn good. It's just got a blemish on it right now. It's a pretty big blemish. Don't get me wrong. Tolu Smith is a significant loss to this front court, but there's still a lot of talented pieces in Mississippi State's front court. So I still think they're going to be able to rebound. I still think they're going to be able to compete. I think they're going to be able to shoot at a decent percentage from down low. So I'm still big on State's front court. It's just a different type of big now. Would I call them my number 1 anymore? Not with Tolu Smith out. But would I say that they're still somewhere among the top 7 front courts in the SEC? Absolutely. I still think they arrange in that area.
Yeah, David, you touched on a big piece there in Jimmy Bell. I think that was a great get, and that transfer from West Virginia. Unfortunately, we saw the kind of downfall of that program earlier this offseason and talked about what a big position this puts Mississippi State in, having another great man in the front court. When it comes to Jimmy Bell, I think he's really going to elevate this team and make that duct tape a little bit stronger going into the season now.
Yeah, you're not going to have that down low threat for points necessarily. He only averaged 4.8 points per game for West Virginia, but what you're going to get out of him is a pretty darn good rebounder. He rebounded better than he scored. Over 5 rebounds a game was his average. So Jimmy Bell coming back with all that experience, big body. He is built like a NFL lineman, like 270 pounds, almost 7 foot tall. He's huge. And so he's going to be able to play you a little bit of defense. He's going to be able to get you some rebounds, and he's going to keep the State in a lot of games in the 5 spot throughout the course of this season. So right now it's going to be important to lean on him, but he's a great transfer. And literally, I talked about the depth a little bit in our front courts episode. So this is an example of some of that depth coming into play. So Jimmy Bell, great add out of West Virginia for the Dogs.
Yeah, I think with Bill and, like I said, DJ Jeffries, as long as he's, gotten a little bit more experience under his belt from last season and leans on that consistency he had in the last few games, I think it's going to put them in a solid position to get the season started.
I agree. I think it's going to help them get through some rocky patches.
Yeah. Okay, so this is more of the question on this Mississippi State team. Neither of us had Mississippi State in our top 5 backcourts, but how do you feel about Mississippi State's backcourt?
So while I did have them outside my top 5, I think State's going to be fine in the backcourt. But they added the big add this offseason was Andrew Taylor from Marshall, grad transfer, plenty of experience, averaged over 20 points a game for the Herd last season. He was the number 31 ESPN impact transfer, and he was Rothstein's preseason SEC impact transfer. Great pickup for Mississippi State. State's going to love watching him. And then the Dogs are also returning Shaquille Moore, 9.6 points per game, and Deshaun Davis, 8.5 points per game, and just under four assists per game. They're also adding 4-star freshman Josh Hubbard. So while it's not the deepest backcourt in the SEC, they got some solid pieces. So this is where my concern might lie with the Bulldogs, but I feel like it isn't a liability. It's still going. I think they're going to be very competitive with a lot of teams. They're not the best in the backcourt, I feel like, but they're going to be solid in the front court and totally capable of hanging with a lot of teams this season.
Yeah, definitely. I think, we mentioned Shaquille Moore earlier. I think he's going to be a big piece in this backcourt, as well as a player that may have a little bit of growth here. From what I've been hearing, Trey Fort that transferred from Howard. I think he could be a solid maybe 6-man that could get the Dogs some points going into the season as well.
Yeah, having that rotation of a good 6-man option and Fort will be really good. We'll see if he starts or what the plan is going to be. And then you also, like I mentioned, got a 4-star freshman in Hubbard who's going to be coming in. He was inside the top 100 in certain freshman ranking polls out there. So depending on what list you're looking at and everything like that, I do expect Josh Hubbard to see a little bit of playing time on this team. I'm not 100% on how much that'll be, but we could see him in and out. So if he makes a good contribution on the court, he could help State's backcourt quite a bit.
All right, so we have gone through the roster. Let's look at the schedule for this season down in Starksville. They aren't starting easy. Instead, they will play in the Barstool Invitational against Arizona State to start their year. Arizona State is ranked 6th in Rothstein's Pac-12 preseason power rankings. David, what are your thoughts here on this game?
Oh, yeah, this is going to be a fun trip up to Chicago for Mississippi State. Arizona State's got a decent team. Frankie Collins, Jemiah Neal, Kamari Lands, Alonzo Gaffney, and Sean Phillips. Those guys all going to be waiting, see what they can do this year for Arizona State. It's going to be a decent team. They are waiting for a waiver for Adam Miller, who's projected to be on Arizona State's bench. Now, this Arizona State team is a team that's going to be gunning for the tournament, just like Mississippi State is. They're expected to make some noise and have a chance to make it. So I do think Arizona State is going to be a competitive matchup to start this season out. So that's going to be a tough ask there in Chicago, but it doesn't get any more neutral between two teams from Mississippi and Arizona having to travel all the way to the northernmost portion of the Midwest. So I expect a great game in this one. Obviously, Mississippi State's going to be trying to figure out how they're going to do things without Tolu Smith in that first game, but you got over a month right now to figure it out. And hopefully you can figure out some of those answers in your exhibition games that are coming up. So I expect this to be a decent basketball game.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a solid matchup. I may have marked it as a semi easy dub if we recorded this on Monday, but I think here it's going to be a little bit more challenging, especially like you said, figuring out where those pieces lie at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, it's going to be a great game. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah. So after that, Mississippi State gets a quick break with some mid-majors in Starksville. They'll face UT Martin and North Alabama. See any bumps in the road here for the Bulldogs?
Yeah, so with UT Martin, I don't necessarily see a bump in the road, but this I'm not calling it a bump. I'm just calling it don't sleep. North Alabama last year obviously upset an SEC team during those students aren't there Christmas days during the season. So North Alabama, pretty good basketball program. Keep your eye out on them. They're going to fight. They're going to be a pain. This could look a lot like the Nichols game, but I do think the Bulldogs pull out both these games.
So not necessarily a bump, maybe some like loose gravel if they're traveling on, a motorcycle or something.
Yeah, exactly. You're driving on ice. So, like, just be careful with what you're doing there. Don't fall asleep in that game because North Alabama is going to be tough.
Yeah, for sure. So after that game, those two games, we'll see the MTE basketball tournament for the Bulldogs. Mississippi State is headed to Connecticut for the Hall of Fame tip-off. Game 1, they'll face Washington State. And in Game 2, they're either going to be faced up against Northwestern or Rhode Island. What are your thoughts here on this Hall of Fame tip-off?
Yeah, well, Washington State's not projected exactly super high in the Pac-12, so I do think State can handle this one pretty well. Rothstein's got Washington State sitting 11th and out of 12 in his Pac-12 power rankings. So good names to know: Isaac Jones, Miles Rice, Jabe Mullins, all good players for Washington State. But overall, I think State can definitely take game 1 in this one. Then obviously, I don't know what it is about Rhode Island, but they tend to be just one of the biggest annoying teams in just basketball. I don't know what it is, but like they can be competitive at times. They can be difficult to deal with. That's kind of a game I don't want to play if I'm Mississippi State. And then the other opponent they are facing, Northwestern, they're looking at 6th right now, according to Rothstein in his Big Ten power rankings. Boo Blue or Boo Booey, however you pronounce that name, Ty Berry, Matthew Nicholson, good all-around team, should be pretty darn competitive in the Big Ten this season. That's probably the game that you're wanting if you're Mississippi State to help your net ranking. So I definitely think that Mississippi State wants that Northwestern game for their resume purposes. And that would be a fantastic basketball game. That would be a really good one between Northwestern and Mississippi State. That would be a super competitive game like we'd see with that Arizona State, Mississippi State game.
Yeah, definitely share your sentiment there with the Washington State game. I think it's going to be something that they are going to be able to get through pretty easily. But I don't think they should sleep on Northwestern or Rhode Island at all. Northwestern upset Auburn last year in their MTE, and took home the gold there. So definitely something for the Bulldogs to watch out for.
Northwestern's been a pesky team the last couple of years, so that's definitely going to be a fun opponent if you draw them. But State can win this MTE. I'm not saying they are, especially with the issues that we've been talking about throughout the course of the show. But Northwestern, really good team, and I think that'll be your championship game in this one, Mississippi State and Northwestern.
Maybe let's just start referring to it as the incident, like from here on out. Just after the incident. All right, so that MTE is a good showcase of games, but we're not out of November yet. The Bulldogs will face Nichols, and then we'll face up against Georgia Tech in the ACC SEC Challenge. What are your thoughts here on this Georgia Tech matchup?
I don't know what it is, but I think we've talked about Georgia Tech. I don't know how many times throughout this offseason. Did everybody in the SEC just decide collectively we should play Georgia Tech? I mean, I know that this is Mississippi State's ACC SEC draw, but this is wild how many teams it looks like are playing Georgia Tech. We've already talked about the team a little bit in other episodes, but for our Mississippi State fans, Miles Kelly, Debo Coleman, Kyle Strudevant, I believe is how you pronounce that. Then projected on their bench, Lance Terry, a few other guys. I mean, it's not going to be the super star-studded Georgia Tech team. They are expected to finish in the bottom half of the ACC. Rothstein has them behind Louisville of all teams in his ACC power rankings. So I expect State to get a W here, with or without Tolu. So I think State's going to be fine. This should be a decent resume builder, have a win over another power conference team.
Yeah, I think, we, like you said, we talked about Georgia Tech before. Definitely some solid talent there, but nothing I don't think Mississippi State's going to be able to handle. So, I don't want to say they're going to breeze by it by any means. We'll definitely know more after that MTE, see how those games go and how this team is gelling together. But I think it's going to be a win in the SEC column for this ACC SEC Challenge here.
I would call this probably one of the bigger mismatches that were originally scheduled, but situation has changed. But originally, I thought this was one of the biggest mismatches that were that came out of the scheduling this year.
So after the ACC SEC Challenge, Mississippi State will face a variety of teams, but some solid American Conference opponents are in the mix. They'll face Southern at home, then Tulane in Atlanta for Holiday Hoopsgiving. After that, they'll face Murray State at home and North Texas in Tupelo. Thoughts on this group of games here?
Yeah, it's a unique settings that they're headed to. Games in Tupelo to face North Texas. North Texas has kind of been a pesky team. Of course, they're moving up to the American Conference this year. Murray State's been a tough mid-major the last couple of years. Of course, Matt McMahon now coaches at LSU, so we'll see how Murray State is. And then Southern, not too worried about the Southern game at home, but Tulane might be a little bit more difficult to deal with. But overall, I do think State should win these games. We'll see how it goes, but I do think State should be able to get some W's here. It's going to be a trip to Atlanta for the second time this season for State when they face Tulane. Of course, they're facing Georgia Tech first in Atlanta. So that'll be another trip, and one that they're probably a little bit more comfortable doing because they're used to it at that point.
Yeah, I'm looking probably 3 out of 4 here just because that's a long stretch of games.
It's a long stretch of games. You get some decent teams.
Yeah, for sure. And, you see it happen a lot, especially when you've got a lot of road games. So I'm going to give them some grace here and give them at least one slip up, not put too high of expectations on them there. After that circuit of games, Mississippi State heads up north for the Gotham Classic against Rutgers in New Jersey. The game is in Newark on December 23rd. What are you thinking here, David?
Rutgers is let's just say Mississippi State should be happy they're not playing Rutgers next year because they're having a lot of success right now on the recruiting trail. But Rutgers is expected to be a middle of the pack Big Ten team. So this is a team that you need to beat, for your resume purposes. It's not a must win game, or at least it doesn't look like it yet, given the circumstances. But Rutgers should be a tough opponent, especially having to go up there to New Jersey and playing them. That's going to be a tough game. So you got Derek Simpson, decent guard for Rutgers. You got Gavin Griffiths, Noah Fernandez, some really good players on this Rutgers team. And so Rutgers is going to be a tough opponent. Mississippi State's done a really good job, I feel like, this offseason, putting together a schedule in which they're facing some decent competition throughout the course of the season, but competition that they can beat. So it's going to be interesting. I think that's going to be a tough game for Mississippi State, but we'll see how the outcome comes out on that one.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's going to be one of those games that kind of gets them ready for SEC play as well. A little higher caliber talent there. Like you said, not quite what we're looking at for next year, but still some players that know their way around a court. So we'll see how it goes. Before we wrap up non-conference play, State is going to go up against Bethune-Cookman. But let's turn to the conference schedule because I'm pretty certain we're going to see a W there in that game.
Yeah.
So going over our home and home series, Mississippi State has got Alabama twice, Auburn twice, Kentucky, Ole Miss, and South Carolina at home and away. Strictly in Starksville, they will see Arkansas, Georgia, Tennessee, and Vanderbilt. And on the road, they will be going to the Swamp in Florida, up to Mizzou, LSU, and Texas A&M. What are your thoughts on this conference schedule?
The draws are just really interesting, right? You got Alabama and Kentucky on your home and home series. That could be a tough draw. But I do think it's going to be really competitive at times. Now, hopefully you're getting Tolu Smith sometime back in SEC play. So this is going to be interesting. So Kentucky, young team, and I believe you have them relatively early. I'm not sure. I have to look at the schedule real fast. Ole Miss is no joke. I know State fans don't want to necessarily hear that, but I do think if Ole Miss is not going to be a pushover next season, Chris Beard's got that program moving in a really good direction after his first offseason. So I would not be surprised to see that series split. South Carolina, I think they'll take care of business against South Carolina. And then having Arkansas at home, I don't know what it is, but Arkansas traditionally does not play well at the hump. I don't know what the deal is. I don't know what goes on with that. But even when Arkansas has clearly been the more talented team, Mississippi State still beats them. And I don't understand that. It's one of the most frustrating things if you're a Razorback fan to completely understand. But so maybe that's a huge win for State on their schedule if they could pull that one out. And then they're also getting Tennessee at home. So they're going to have some really good chances to get quality wins at home. On the road, though, Florida's going to be tough. Mizzou's a tough arena. You should be able to handle LSU, but Texas A&M is also going to be a tough opponent this season. So that road schedule is going to be difficult for State. So it'll all depend in a lot of ways on what we're looking at with Tolu Smith, whether he's in or out. So, given this time during conference play, but I think it's a tough schedule, but I think it can be manageable depending on what the roster looks like at that time.
Yeah, I think, they really got a tough draw on their home and home series there. Like you said, mentioning Alabama, Kentucky, and Ole Miss. I think Auburn's going to be a rough one on the road as well. And then, Mizzou traditionally is pretty hard to play at their home court. So that could be a rough one. And Texas A&M, we've been really high on them this season. So definitely some tough draws there for Mississippi State. But I've got the win total sitting at 18.5. Are you going over or under there, David?
So my number was higher, when we, beforehand. 18.5, though, does sound like I'd still go over that and say that State wins 19 games. Now, that number varies depending on where Tolu Smith, when he comes back. But during that non-conference stretch, we'll see how it goes. They should be able to win some games, but we're going to see how they figure things out without him. So I'm going to go over and say they get to 19 as I understand the situation right now. So I'm gonna give the over on this.
Okay, giving some grace there for Mississippi State fans. Hopefully, you come out correct. But taking that into account, what are you thinking here for your floor and ceiling for this Bulldogs team?
Yeah, so let's start with the floor. This doesn't seem truly likely, but given the circumstances, like, it definitely needs to be accepted. This team may only win like 18 games with Tolu Smith being out. That may become a real possibility. Last year, this team won 21 games, and this year they've got a more slightly difficult schedule. So I think 18 might be the floor, maybe 17, somewhere around there. It just depends on when you get Tolu Smith back and what he's like when he gets back. But I still think they'll have the resume. Depending on the wins and losses, they should have the resume to at least fight for the bubble, given the current circumstances as we understand them. So I think on the floor, they're going to be fighting for the bubble, and they might have a chance to get to 19 games. As far as the ceiling goes, let's say they've got it figured out. They get out there and don't miss a beat, or they recover pretty quickly. This team could still finish maybe top 5 in the SEC and pull off a 6 seed. In the tournament. It just really depends. You get over 20 games, you win another 21, and you get some really quality wins. Now, my expectations for this team have drastically changed. I think they'll make the tournament. I think they'll make the tournament, even depending on when Tolu Smith comes back. 19 games seems doable. It might be a big ask, but it seems doable. And I think they'll be in. I think they'll be one of the 8 teams from the SEC that'll be in this season, depending on how the non-conference goes with life after Tolu Smith. But I still think this team can make the tournament. It just might be a rockier road than what you were thinking, as I mentioned a couple of hours ago. So I think they'll finish somewhere in the top 7 of the SEC. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. I'm really having to put a lot of we'll sees in this because obviously, Tolu Smith was a significant part of this team. So losing him, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, you have a large variable that was once considered a constant. So it changes things. So I totally get where you're coming from with that, David. Looking here at my floor, I'm thinking around 17 games is going to be the floor, and kind of sitting in the NIT tournament for this Mississippi State team, mainly because, the piece that I felt like was going to hold it all together is up in the air. But, they do have a solid stretch of road games there. And, we talked about all the travel that can get to you. They could drop a game here or two there. And then, some SEC, the SEC is competitive this season.
It's very competitive, and it's going to be tough.
It's going to be tough to just snatch wins left and right like they were able to last season. Not saying that it can't be done, but it's definitely easier to drop a game, I think, this season than it was last year.
Yeah, it's important to note that a lot of the teams that Mississippi State was beating last year, and this is not to call what Mississippi State did last year not impressive, because it was very impressive what Chris Jans was able to pull off at Mississippi State last year. But when you were looking at this pre-Tolu Smith, you were looking at it like, okay, we've got the better roster. Last year, Mississippi State beat a lot of first-year coaches. This year, everybody's got a chance to pull from the transfer portal at the same time. The conference as a whole got better. We had so many new coaches in this league last year. And then collectively, like 12 out of the 14 or 11 out of the 14 teams in this conference really did get better this offseason. So there's a huge variance on where this could end up right now. So I'm not calling free falling yet. I'm not saying the sky is falling. But, it's going to be a much more competitive league this year. So when I was originally thinking that State might win 2021 games, as my expectation this season, those games have changed. Like, those things have changed. So I still think they're going to be a competitive team. I think they're going to fight really hard. And I think they've got the coach to get them a little bit further than what, some fans might currently be thinking in Starkville. But we'll see what's going down.
Yeah. And, speaking 2021, that's kind of my ceiling right now. Like I said, I think 2021 games is going to be great for the Mississippi State, sitting comfortably, hopefully in the NCAA tournament at that ceiling level, with maybe an 8 to 10 seed somewhere in that range. I think they could do pretty well in the long run. Expectation wise, like I said, around 18.5 mark is what I'm guessing for me at this moment.
So calling bubble is what your expectation is right now with that Tolu Smith.
Yep. That's what I'm seeing.
That's what you're saying. Given the current knowledge we have now, if he shows back up at the beginning of SEC play and he's ready to go, that would be a game changer for Mississippi State, obviously, because you got a lot of win opportunities in front of you. So we'll see. And obviously the committee takes into consideration, what circumstances existed. Now, they don't take it into great consideration, but they do take it into consideration.
Yeah, it's one of those. It's going to be up in the air. I was always interested in athletic training and took a few classes. So the way players come back from an injury is always hit or miss. Like, it's going to be either gun and ready to go, or there's going to be some struggles in the road. So you can't automatically assume that he's going to come in and get back to scoring 15, 16 points a game and pulling down 8 boards.
Yeah, I mean, perfect example last season, Nick Smith Jr. for Arkansas. Looked really good before the injury, gets injured, comes back, gets back very slowly, it felt like, before he started getting, and he still was not 100% himself, and you could tell during the NCAA tournament from that injury. So we'll see what goes on with Tolu Smith in these next few months.
For sure. All right, we just want to thank you guys so much for checking out the show today. Next time, we are talking with Maggie Johnson about the Missouri Tigers. You don't want to miss it, so be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time.